A rule I really like in 3.5 and Pathfinder is all of the different options you get in combat to do different things. I think it's really cool that it's kind of difficult to pull off some maneuvers and only certain classes like fighters can do it. Combat's a really tricky thing to pin down because you want it to be simple for newer players, but you also want it to be complex for seasoned ones. And while I really like Pathfinder and Starfinder's combat because of the amount of things the game gives rules for you to do, in the years that I'm coming to play 5th edition, I'm starting to realize how boring the combat gets sometimes. I've DM'd and played through a lot of campaigns that have gone on for long periods of time, through many different levels, through all these different classes, and combat is really fun. 5th edition combat's really great because it's simple, and your grandma, who's gonna come play it, could figure out how it works, and she doesn't have to figure out what flat-footed AC is. However, one thing about 5th edition that a lot of people really like is that they took all of those crazy intricate rules that 3.5 had and made them a lot simpler. You see, instead of calculating if the guy's moving, or if you're using a ranged weapon, or what kind of magic you're casting at the guy to give you +1, +2, +5s, or negatives according to your attack or damage, you now just have advantage or disadvantage. And this simplifies everything, especially for the Dungeon Master who's running the combat. If something happens that's advantageous, they get advantage. If something's going poorly, they have disadvantage. It's the simplest rule ever. It's just 2d20s, you take the lowest one. It makes a lot of sense. The problem with this is that flanking ruins all of it. And specifically, my problem with flanking is that, first of all, it's a variant rule. We all know that flanking is a variant rule. You don't have to use it, but everybody expects that you use it. Normally, when you go into a game, you're like, hey, Dungeon Master, you use flanking rules? And DM's like, yeah. One of the easiest things about 5th edition combat is that if anybody does anything really cool or awesome or advantageous, all you have to do is give them advantage. You don't have to give them a specific plus that they're going to argue about or have them make multiple rolls. It's just like, no, there you go. It's just advantage. You roll 2d20s and you might hit, you may not. It's random, but it's more advantageous, which is really great and really easy for players and Dungeon Masters. And I like it. My only problem is that when we use flanking, it's super easy to get advantage all the time. And not just for fighters, it's for barbarians, it's for clerics, it's for warlocks, it's for everybody. Everybody can get advantage so long as, oh, these are kind of like squares. If there's one guy here, and then there's another guy here, and there's a guy right here, they get advantage, both of them get advantage. Now, this makes sense in concept. If you're fighting and there's a guy in the middle and there's two other guys on the other side, he's too distracted. You have advantage on fighting him. The problem behind this concept is now players are only going to try to get that flanking advantage because it's so easy. I remember playing 3.5 and there were always these really, really creative ways we would try to get better attack rolls. Oftentimes we would jump and try to swing across chandeliers, or we would try to trip opponents, or we would try to do all these different things in order to get better bonuses to our attack rolls. If you notice, if you're a Dungeon Master and or a player, people in 5th edition don't do this that much. And it's because all of these things I just listed just give you advantage. Even knocking somebody prone, somebody's on the ground, all that you're going to get is advantage. If a fighter comes in and does their Battlemaster swirly thingy attack that uses a D8 and one of their class abilities and possibly a bonus action, I don't think he uses a bonus action, it's still just going to give them advantage. A barbarian can rage and get advantage. A vengeance paladin can channel their divinity and gain advantage. You see how all of these things are just leveled on this playing field. However, it works, it's balanced, it makes sense. If everybody has to do something in order to get advantage, then it works out. If the paladin has to use a channel divinity, then fine, they get advantage for 10 minutes. If the fighter is going to use one of their Battlemaster tactics and they get advantage, then they get advantage, and they're using something to get that bonus. The problem is that flanking costs nothing. So, when players want to do anything kind of cool, like trip their opponent, or jump in the air and swing across a chandelier and drop on top of them, all they're going to get is advantage. why not just walk down the stairs and get on the other side with your buddy and get advantage? So that's my rant here, is that flanking is stupid, and the balancing behind it doesn't make any sense. And it creates a problem in 5th edition combat that makes people just swarm the enemies and attack with advantage the entire time until they win. The obvious solution to this problem is to just remove flanking. I don't do flanking in my games. The problem is that a lot of my players get upset with me when things like that happen, because while we've established this rule that we've been playing in our games for a long time, just to cut it off and say, hey, we're not doing that anymore, doesn't work out very well. And what ends up happening is, even though I get rid of the rule, people are still going to try to do it and argue it and be like, I'm on the other side of him, how is he not distracted? And I'll be like, I don't know, there's no rule for this, it's just advantage! The obvious solution that I know Cody and Guy and a lot of other DMs that I've known use, just say, it's a +2. The problem with that is that it's kind of lame and a little bit hard to keep track of. And also it can be argued a little more here and there. In practice, from what I've seen, it's just kind of like, What it does, it kind of de-incentivizes people to flank because it's just going to get a +2. The problem is that now everything else that you're going to be giving your players may end up being a +2. I'm not saying that all DMs are going to do that, they're just going to rope everything into being +2s, but 5th edition isn't built around a number system, it's built around the whole advantage-disadvantage system. It's either flanking gives advantage, or it doesn't. This whole +2 thing works if you like it, but I mean, it's just as bad as it not being there whatsoever. Even though that sounds like a very biased opinion, I just have to say for myself, I don't like the +2 rule, because I think it's lame. I think flanking should be a thing that you should be able to do in-game, because flanking is super advantageous. If you're one guy fighting 2 guys, it should be difficult for you to fight them, or it should be easier for them to hit you. A +2, however, is like, that's like your grandma being like, okay, take a cookie and go and leave me alone. It's like, it's not what you want. It's just a little, here's your little thing. And I think there's more creative solutions to this. So far, the way I've been trying to do it in my games to try to get everything that I want, to eliminate everybody from just ganging up around the enemies, to forcing them to do more creative things, is I make it a skill roll. Basically, if you want to flank, you have to roll, and you have to beat the armor class with a skill roll of some type. It has to make sense for the situation, and you have to work it into the narrative somehow. I like this a little bit more because it allows the Dungeon Master to paint a little bit of a picture on how the player is flanking. I oftentimes also make it so that larger monsters like trolls or dragons can't be flanked, because it's no fun and it's really lame. And it's also really hard to determine where to flank. I know the book gives you options, but it's like, can I flank right here? And everybody's like, yeah, that makes sense. And I'm like, I don't know, guys, that doesn't really make any sense. And it's like, well, why can't this guy flank here? And I don't know. My option is that if you come into combat and you want to try to flank, you have to be creative about it in what you're going to do with your solution. There's another person on the side of this knight that you're fighting, and you get up behind him. How are you going to strike him while he's distracted? Are you going to intimidate him? Okay, you're going to yell at him to scare him into knowing that somebody else is coming up behind you, and maybe you don't get the advantage, but your friend gets the advantage. Or maybe you come into battle and you use your knowledge of the arcane to make it look like you're casting a spell, but you just distract him from what you're really doing and you go to stab him with your sword. Okay, you can either make an Arcana check or a Deception check. And all you have to do is just beat some DC that the Dungeon Master makes up, or the armor class. And what this does is, yes, it allows flanking back into the game and they get advantage if they succeed. But what it does is it encourages your players to be more creative while they're in combat. They will be forced to describe the way they're going to go about things. They have to tell you where they're going to put the sword. They have to... You have the wrong address. It's okay. Somebody was at my door in the middle of this video. They had the wrong address. So what this does is it forces your players to be a bit more creative in how they go about combat, where they're going to strike their swords, where their magic is going to go, how they're going to go about flanking, and what this will in turn do is encourage them to do other things that may give them advantage. Since the whole system is built on advantage, and if you're going to give them advantage for doing other things anyways, why diminuate the fact of flanking into a +2 when you can just make it a little bit harder for them but encourage them at the same time to do other things that could give them advantage. In turn, you could stop everything from crowding around the dragon while it tries to fly away and everybody gets attack of opportunities, or the troll who just gets surrounded by the enemy and everybody gets advantage because they're just stabbing him left and right. It'll allow players to possibly think, hey, maybe knocking him prone would be a good idea because then we'll get advantage and we won't have to roll for it. The gears will click as soon as they start playing, and it can get a little bit interesting if you try to go about it. Anyways, this has been me, Clickbait Johnson, here with helping your games, I guess. I don't know.